Dust motes hovered in the stale light streaming through the attic window. Danielle stood still, her hand pressed against a stack of cardboard boxes covered in decades of dust. The air tasted of aged cedar, and beneath her feet the worn floorboards groaned slightly as though protesting her presence. She had not been back to this house in years, yet here she was, cradling an old piece of her childhood, a chance glimpse of something fragile and half-forgotten, unable to move for fear that everything she had repressed for so long might come hurtling back. She wrestled open the top box, rummaging through old clothes and faded Polaroids, a silent swirl of memories tangling in her mind. Grandmother's floral dress, father's tattered baseball cap. Then, amid the clutter, she found a heavy wooden frame wrapped in a musty bed sheet. Her breath caught in her throat as she peeled back the fabric. It was an old family portrait. She recognized the orchard behind them and the dusty sunrise that tinted the horizon. She saw herself, just a wide-eyed 9-year-old girl, sporting a forced smile. Her parents stood just behind her, her father's thick cowl. If the scene had ended there, it would have been just another photograph of a tight-lipped family, as though it had been taken at a particularly awkward moment. But the faces of her mother and father were scratched out in a frenzied pattern of torn paper and ink. The damage was messy and deliberate. Mother's eyes ripped away, father's entire face marred by ragged, ugly scratches. Danielle flipped the portrait around, checking if something had carved through from behind. It was blank. The jagged lines were scrawled only onto the front. She shuddered at the thought of the desperate anger or fear that had driven someone to take such a violent approach. Who had done this? And why? Later that afternoon, she brought the photo downstairs and placed it on the kitchen table. The old house was silent except for the faint humming of the fridge. Even the wind outside seemed to hush. The place felt abandoned, though many of her early childhood relics were scattered about. She sat down, pressing her fingertips against the disfigured photograph. A tingle of anxiety rippled through her. A memory beckoned at the edges of her mind, something dark, something that had remained locked away ever since she'd moved out as a teen. Whenever she tried to recall it, there was only a phantom sense of dread, like a hand pressed lightly on her ribcage. She heard a light thud from the next room. The old house had a tendency to make such noises, wood contracting or settling, but it still made her heart leap into her throat. Getting up, the photograph in hand, she moved toward the living room. Her reflection appeared faintly in the tarnished surface of a dusty mirror on the wall. She paused there, noticing how hollow her eyes looked. She drew in a deep breath. Perhaps she was just on edge. She forced herself to check each corner. Nothing. No intruder. The living room was as she'd left it, with half-open boxes splayed out on the threadbare carpet. She glanced back at the photo and tried to shrug off the prickling sensation that someone else was in the house, watching her from some hidden vantage point. An imposing grandfather clock against a far wall chimed suddenly, the clang echoing throughout the house. Danielle jumped, then a wry smile flitted across her face. She remembered that clock from her youth. It had always rung at unsettling times, late at night or early in the morning, as though it had a sinister mind of its own. It was set to the wrong hour now. 2:17 p.m. was hardly the top of the hour, but the faint ring lingered in the old rooms. She tried to shake off the feeling that the house was intentionally taunting her. She set the photograph on a coffee table in the living room, planning to return to the attic for more boxes. But as she retraced her steps, she found herself drawn again to the photo. Without thinking, she slipped it beneath her arm, as if letting it out of her sight carried unacceptable risk. She climbed the rickety attic steps, flicking the light switch at the top to bring a dim bulb to life. The old wiring crackled, then flickered. Slowly, she sifted through more dusty boxes. All sorts of keepsakes emerged, bundled in brittle newspaper. Porcelain figurines, embroidered tablecloths, rummaged diaries. Her mother's cursive scrolled across a battered journal. It smelled faintly of lavender, just as her mother had. Danielle's fingers trembled. She set it aside to investigate later. But even the prospect of reading her mother's words couldn't tug Danielle's gaze away from the marred photograph. That savage scrolling over her parents' faces made her stomach churn. Something was there, pressing at the edges of her mind. something that had terrified her enough to bury it after all this time. The question was whether she really wanted to unearth the memory. She reached for the journal. The cover was cracked. Inside, ragged pages teemed with confessional notes that read like short letters, date after date, a single sentence about the day's events, or her mother's reflections on the family. Danielle brushed aside the lumps in her throat when she recognized references to her father's outbursts, the repeated mention of an understanding that sourly twisted between them. But there was nothing about a portrait or scratched-out faces. The final entry trailed off mid-sentence, as though her mother had been interrupted and never came back. Day turned to dusk. The sky beyond the attic window glowed in twilight hues. It crossed Danielle's mind that she should probably close up the house for the evening, yet she found herself pacing. Her heart felt too restless, like an animal banging against the bars of its cage, impatient for freedom. Something in this creaking, dormant home refused to let her slip into complacency. She descended to the living room and carefully placed the journal beside the photograph on the coffee table. She needed to keep investigating. Her feet guided her to the basement steps. If someone or something were waiting for her, it wasn't in the attic. It might be in the damp, shadowy recesses below. She pulled the hanging chain for the single overhead bulb. A weak circle of light illuminated the descending steps, walls lined with flaking paint. She let out a steadying breath and walked down. The basement was musty, but the hush felt deeper here, pressing heavily on her ears. She scanned the shelves stacked with paint cans and small wooden crates. The flickering bulb overhead revealed spiderwebs drifting in the corners. As she traced her fingertips along the gritty stone wall, a memory flickered in her mind. Her father's rage, her mother's sobbing. She had been about 9 or 10, rooted at the top of the basement stairs, peering around the banister as her father yelled. Then the memory darted away like a startled cat. She exhaled slowly. Her father had been a stern, austere man, not quick to show affection. But had he ever been cruel? A scuttling noise startled her. Danielle froze, eyes moving to the far corner. Probably just a rodent. The corner was in shadow, unreachable by that single overhead light. Unbidden, she found herself creeping toward it, bracing for the unexpected. A large wooden trunk lay there, the edges cracked, an old padlock hanging open from its latch. She lifted the lid with caution. Inside, she discovered neatly folded children's clothes, her old dresses and socks, a couple of stuffed animals with missing eyes, a small crocheted blanket. Her mother had kept these things, apparently cherishing them even while the house had fallen into disrepair. Yet among these personal items, she found something else. A single spool of thick black thread, entwined with a slip of tattered paper that read, in a child's uneven scrawl, "Keep away. Don't look at him." Her heart thudded in her chest. She tried to recall writing such a note, but no memory rose to confirm it. She pressed the paper between her palms, the edges so thin it nearly tore. Don't look at him. Who was him? Her father? Another relative? Fear fluttered in her belly. She set the spool of thread aside and tucked the note in her pocket. Maybe there would be some clue in the diaries. One thing nagged at her. If she was the one who wrote that note, why couldn't she remember doing it? She returned upstairs, leaving the trunk open. The old house seemed heavier now, as if the shadows had expanded. Dusk had given way to night, the interior lit only by a couple of bare bulbs. She switched on the dusty lamp in the living room, which fought off the dark with a stained yellow glow. The photograph and her mother's journal on the coffee table now seemed like conspirators, silently daring her to confront whatever she had walled off for so long. Clutching the journal, she flipped to earlier entries. Towards the beginning, her mother wrote about a family outing to the orchard, the same orchard that appeared in the background of the scratched-up photograph. Her mother had enjoyed that morning, capturing a rare moment of the father in a relaxed mood. He had been, in her mother's words, kind, if not entirely present, anxious about something unsaid. But deeper in the pages the tone shifted. Her mother penned references to a stain within the family and how she was unsure whether she could protect her daughter from it. "I've tried to shield Danielle," one entry ended, "but the world grows dark around us." Danielle pushed the journal away, tears stinging her eyes. She remembered her mother as a gentle soul with sad eyes, often gazing toward the orchard. She had always assumed her mother had regrets about unfulfilled dreams. But a new fear prickled at her. There was more to that sorrow, something more ominous. She eyed the old photograph. It was from the orchard day, a day that might have begun well but ended in terror. A pang of disorientation overcame her. She rubbed her temples, chasing that half-buried memory. Something about the orchard, an argument. Yet all she retrieved was an echo of her father's voice, shouting. Then she recalled her mother urging her to hide behind a row of trees, to be quiet, not to look. A sudden rap at the front door broke the silence. She jumped, nearly dropping the journal. Carefully, she approached the door and peered through the side window. Whoever stood outside was obscured by the darkness, only a silhouette. She could make out the shape of a man's shoulders. Her mind reeled. No one was supposed to know she was staying in the old house. She cracked open the door, fearful but determined. The man stepped into the faint porch light. He was middle-aged, with short sandy hair and a half-apologetic expression. It took her a moment to recognize him. "Nathan?" she finally said. Nathan had been her friend in elementary school, a quiet boy next door. When she left for college, they lost touch. What are you doing here?" He looked just as tense as she felt. "I saw your car outside." His gaze flicked to the house's interior, as if searching for something. "I was just in the neighborhood," he stammered, unable to meet her eyes directly. "I had a feeling you might come back eventually." They both stood there awkwardly. She squirmed under the weight of all their unspoken memories. After a moment's hesitation, she invited him inside. He took cautious steps across the threshold. Glancing at the piled boxes, the corner of his mouth twitched with old, uncertain warmth. Then his eyes landed on the photograph. She could see the tension in his face. "I remember that day," he said quietly, edging around the coffee table. "In the orchard. I was there, but I didn't see what happened. All I remember was your father screaming and your mother crying. After that, I don't know. You left school a few days later, and that was it." Danielle swallowed against the dryness in her throat. "I don't remember any details," she admitted. "I have these, I guess they're repressed memories. Whenever I try to think of them, it's just darkness." Nathan hesitated. "Everybody in town used to say," he trailed off, seeming conflicted about whether he should speak. "They used to say your father was disturbed, that he was into things he shouldn't have been, but I always thought that was just malicious gossip." Her father's face remained scratched out in the portrait, like a featureless phantom, something best forgotten, or maybe it had to be remembered for her to be free. She steeled herself. "Do you want to help me look around? There might be something here that can tell me what truly happened." Nathan watched her with uneasy sympathy, yet after a brief pause he nodded. "Sure, I'll help." They set off rummaging through boxes in the living room, flipping through old photo albums and documents. The pictures showed typical snapshots of birthdays, holiday gatherings, and the orchard. But there was a conspicuous gap in any pictures taken around the time Danielle was 9 or 10. One or two photos appeared incomplete, with corners ripped, or faces scribbled over. The sense of dread grew heavier. Whatever had happened, it seemed her father either tried to hide it, or her mother had tried to erase the evidence. Nathan opened a dusty binder labeled Estate Documents. A brittle piece of paper fluttered out. He crouched to pick it up and scanned it. "It's a record for therapy sessions," he said slowly, his eyes tracking the page. "It lists your father, Cedric Valentine, as a patient at a psychiatric hospital about an hour away from here." Danielle stepped closer to read. The details made her blood run cold. Multiple sessions, references to severe paranoia, a violent outburst. The final note read, "Patient discharged against medical advice." A single date. It was exactly a week before the orchard photograph was taken. She leaned against the coffee table to steady herself. I had no idea," she whispered. "What if he was dangerous? Did my mother know?" This might explain some of her fear. Nathan gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "We only have scraps of the story, but I remember my parents hush-hushing about it back then. Dana from down the street told me the policeman visited your house late one night. The next day, you were gone." Her voice trembled. "Gone? We left, but not as a family. Father wasn't with us, I think, or... Oh God." She closed her eyes and tried to breathe. In the hush that followed, the ancient house groaned. The only illumination came from the living room lamp, leaving the hallway in shadowed gloom. She felt an almost tangible presence in the corners of the room, like a pair of eyes turned upon her. Nathan must have sensed it too, because he glanced around uneasily. At last he spoke. "Maybe we should check the attic again. We might have missed something more specific." The two climbed the steps. The overhead bulb buzzed. Nathan rummaged through a half-empty trunk. Danielle rifled through the diaries again, flipping from one to another. Her mother's shaky handwriting became more frantic in the final entries. Scrawled phrases jumped out at her. "He's losing control. The orchard is not safe. Danielle can't see this. Faces in the dark. Must leave tonight." Danielle's skin pebbled with goosebumps. She forced herself to keep reading. Then she spotted a line that nearly knocked the breath out of her. "If I don't scratch them out, they'll haunt me." It was an abrupt statement, scrawled in the margin next to a doodle of eyes. The date aligned with the orchard photograph. An icy shiver coursed through her. Had her mother been the one who defaced the photo? Was it an attempt to protect herself by destroying the image of Daniel's father's face? Or was there another explanation? Nathan exhaled shakily. That's horrifying. Your mother must have felt truly threatened or believed something supernatural was at work." Danielle closed the diary, tears burning her eyes. "I always thought she was just sad, not..." She paused. "There might have been mental illness on top of everything else. Or maybe Father left her no other route." She was about to move to the next diary when an unsteady sense of horror began creeping over her. A memory flickered to life, revealing itself in glimpses. Her father's raised voice, an argument about the orchard's voices, her mother insisting it's all in your head, and then her father's face twisted in a rage that no child should ever have seen. He had brandished a heavy tool, a gardening spade. She remembered wanting to run, but feeling glued to the spot. She remembered her mother's shrill whisper in her ear, "Don't look at him." Danielle expelled a shaky breath. Suddenly, she saw the orchard. She was huddled against a gnarled tree trunk, hugging her knees. She heard a sickening thud. Her mother's scream, echoing off the orchard rose. Then, all sound cut to ringing silence, and something deep and primal forced her mind to bury the memory. She came back to the present, vision blurred by tears. Nathan rushed to her side, steadying her. "What is it?" he asked urgently. She tried to speak, but the words wavered in her throat. She swallowed painfully. "In the orchard. I think my father attacked my mother," he snapped. She shuddered. "I think I watched the first blow. Then the rest is... blank." Nathan squeezed her hand. "I'm sorry. That's unspeakable. Is that how she died?" Danielle swiped at her eyes, focusing on the swirling dust. "I don't know. I was told she died from an accident. My relatives said she fell down the stairs and broke her neck. That's the story they told me at the funeral. But I was never allowed to see it happen to confirm. Now, I wonder if they were lying." Her words tapered off into a trembling hush. "And my father, he vanished soon after. I just never questioned it. I was a child. The family must have hidden the truth from me, and I never dared look back." Nathan's expression mirrored her horror. "We can't change the past, but you deserve the truth. If your father attacked your mother, someone must have found out." They sat in the attic's hush, letting the reality settle over them. Eventually, Nathan helped her gather all the diaries. They carried them downstairs to the living room. Danielle sat on the couch, the photograph lying next to her. The scratched-out faces now looked like an omen instead of a random act of vandalism. She recalled the line from her mother's diary about needing to scratch them out or risk being haunted. Her mother might have been haunted by the memory of his face of that night of terror. Or perhaps she literally believed that as long as his face was obliterated, he couldn't return to harm them. But he did come back. His outburst left her mother lifeless. Or maybe they just left, fleeing from him, but it was too late. Outside, a gust of wind made the windows rattle. Danielle placed a trembling hand on the photo. What if my father never actually left? What if... She broke off, eyes darting to the basement door, half expecting to see a ghostly figure. We should check the orchard, she said, the realization chilling her. It's part of the property. He spent a lot of time there. Maybe there's a clue. Darkness blanketed the orchard, yet Danielle felt an irrational urgency to go. Nathan hesitated, glancing outside at the black silhouettes of trees swaying in the wind. Okay, he said at last, voice low, but stay close to me. They retrieved flashlights and stepped outside, the house's porch light casting an anemic glow. The orchard stretched behind the property, rows of gnarled, leaf-bare trees that groaned in the breeze. Their flashlights cut eerie paths through the night. Danielle advanced slowly, memories fluttering to the surface. Images of her father's shadow against the orchard rose. The taste of fear on her tongue, she clenched Nathan's hand tightly. I think it was near the far end, she whispered. Keep going. Underfoot, leaves crunched. The orchard parted into an open clearing. That faint ring of night insects hummed around them. Danielle's heart pounded fiercely. She turned her flashlight onto the ground. At first, just grass and patches of earth. Then she spotted something partially buried, the corner of an old wooden sign. She hurried over, kneeling and brushing away dirt. The sign was rotted, but faint letters read, "No trespassing, Valentine family property." A broken chain with a rusted padlock dangled from a stake. Why would her father chain off a secluded part of the orchard? Nathan pointed his beam a few feet away. Over there. Something jutted from the ground, a half-buried post with a rope attached. Danielle felt nauseous dread as they gingerly approached. She saw an arrangement of rocks piled in what looked like a makeshift grave. The rope wound around a rectangular object that had once been lodged upright, but now lay slumped. An old cross? A piece of orchard equipment? She couldn't tell. The entire area smelled of damp earth and decaying vegetation. A flurry of images assaulted her mind. Her father digging furiously, her mother sprawled on the ground, Danielle's hands pressed to her mouth. She tasted the metallic tang of fear. Nathan quietly placed an arm around her shoulders, guiding her away from the eerie sight. This might be where... He trailed off, but his grim tone said enough. She felt tears streak her cheeks as the memory poured back in jagged, half-formed segments. She saw her father's wild eyes, his insistence that, "They told me to do it. We can't let the cursed face remain." She remembered her mother's pleas, her father's monstrous fury, and the orchard trees a silent audience to a horrifying scene. Then her father realized Danielle was watching. He turned on her, brandishing the spade. Her mother used her last ounce of strength to stop him, pushing him away so that Danielle could escape. The orchard seemed to spin as Danielle fled, her mind fracturing, repressing the entire event in her terror. Mouth dry, Danielle forced the words out. I think he buried her here after he did it. He thought there was a curse. Something about faces." She shivered violently. Oh God, he was insane. Staring at the mounded earth, she wondered what had happened to him afterward. Did other relatives discover the makeshift grave? Or maybe he'd hidden her remains somewhere else, and this was just something left behind. So many disturbing possibilities. Nathan gently ushered her to stand. She felt the orchard's darkness pressing in, as though the rows of trees conspired to hide unimaginable secrets. Silently, they made their way back to the house, hearts weighed by the horrifying discovery. She and Nathan entered the living room, setting their flashlights aside. Danielle sank onto the couch, trying to steady her racing heart. She glanced at the old photograph once more. The orchard behind that younger version of her, her parents' faces now so violently scratched out. However twisted the reason, it became clear that the defacement was an echo of the father's destructive act, and possibly her mother's final attempt to erase the man who destroyed their family. Nathan sat next to her, clasping her trembling hands. You have to decide what to do with all this. The diaries, the orchard, that grave. You could go to the authorities. Bring everything you found. Speechless, she took a moment to gather her thoughts. My father disappeared, she finally said. Maybe the police never discovered him. Or if they did, they never told me. By the time I was old enough to ask questions, all I had were vague stories about an accident. My grandparents died soon after, so no one was left to explain. But I can't live with these lies anymore. She exhaled shakily, eyeing her mother's journals. I need closure, and she deserves justice. She picked up the photograph and gently ran her fingertip over the corner that still showed her mother's face, though scratched out. Enough remained to see her hair. Then she ran that same fingertip over her father's missing features. For all the agony and terror he inflicted, for all his mental illness or malicious acts, what overcame Danielle was a suffocating sadness that her family had been irreparably broken by madness. Nathan, sensing her turmoil, remained silent yet supportive. After a few seconds, Danielle rose, cradling the photo and diaries in her arms. We'll turn these over. I'll call the police in the morning, let them investigate. I'm done letting this house's secrets fester. Tears filled her eyes again, but this time there was a fierceness to them. I have to face the truth, no matter how ugly it is. That night, she and Nathan huddled together in the living room, dozing fitfully, lamps glowing to keep the darkness at bay. No nightmares surfaced, perhaps because the real horror had already been unleashed. When dawnlight broke through the grimming windows, Danielle felt an unexpected calm, though the orchard behind the house still hid unspeakable memories. They were no longer locked in the vault of her mind. She had named them now, confronted them. Outside, the rising sun colored the old property in pale gold, revealing the orchard's tangled shapes. The emptiness she felt remained heavy, but there was a sense of resolve, too. She wouldn't keep her mother's story buried. She stood, retrieved her phone, and dialed the local sheriff's office. Nathan gave her a gentle nod. Danielle clutched the old photograph one last time. Its scars would never be undone, but at least now she understood why those faces were scratched out, why the memory had hidden itself from her for so very long. As she waited for someone to answer on the other end of the line, she glanced at her reflection in the glass. Faint though it was, she saw her mother's eyes and traces of her father's shape in her own features. Even if she could never completely shake off their legacy, she was determined to step out of this grim chapter and claim a life unburdened by silence. The phone clicked. A voice crackled on the line. She closed her eyes and said quietly, "I have something to report."